Today I have no place to go because outside it's covered in snow. So I thought I would do a video about the longsword. Hello, Lauren here, and today I had a request to do a video on the longsword. Thank you, Jaelien, for suggesting that. So we're gonna get to this right now. I probably wasn't gonna do a longsword video for another month or so because everybody does a longsword video on YouTube. But I think it would be important to give you a basic overview. If you study historical European martial arts, you probably started with this sword. That's where I started almost 10 years ago. Longsword introductory class. Now I teach longsword introductory class, and it's awesome. It's a lot of fun to share the information with other people. But we're going to talk about this sword in particular, because it's a good analogy for our 15th century medieval longsword, used by knights and men-at-arms in particular. This one is made by SGT Blades in Airdrie, Alberta, Canada, so they're local. It's not a paid review. I bought this. I've had it for almost a year. It is fantastic, this sword. You can see that it looks different from the arming sword we've talked about in our other videos. A different type of pommel. Sometimes we call this a scent stopper. It has a much longer grip. It's got a little bit of a ridge in the middle here. This is so I can feel where my hand is going. The quillins and the crossguard, they are curved. That was per my request. And then a very, very long tapering blade. So it has all of the dynamics of your typical 15th century longsword. The point of balance is fairly close to the hand. It makes it light, maneuverable, fast, and a lot of fun to use. And that's what a longsword should be. Fast and maneuverable. And there are two ways that you could use a longsword. And in the German traditions, which I study for martial arts, one way is Blossfechten, so shirt fighting or unarmored combat, and then there's Harnesfechten, harness fighting or armored combat. So there are two ways to hold the sword, one for each of those systems. Well, we'll talk more about how you fight with that in a later video. Once we get the room fixed up a little bit more, we can talk about how you use the longsword. Today we're just kind of giving you a basic introduction, how you hold it. I can move back a little bit and I can show you. There we go. All the same rules apply, long edge and short edge, or true and false, or even front and back. But since we're talking German, long edge and short edge, one hand goes down here by the pommel. You can slip it down if you really need, and you are pivoting as you attack. So these are not big swings that you do, because as you wind up, you're telling your opponent, hey, I'm doing a big swing. And guess what? They just thrust at you. So you don't want to give time. A quick move like that, it's fine. Hitting the wall, but this has a safety tip. See if the camera will focus. Yeah, so it is spatulated, so it's thick on the end. So I can't actually break the wall with it. I can't cut into anything. It's not sharp, training sword. So it's a lot of fun to use, but if you were fighting someone in armor, then you hold the sword halfway up the blade. And in modern terms, we call it half-swording. In medieval terms, they might call it shortened sword, because you are shortening up your grip, grabbing it halfway, and you have a shorter range. But this is how you hold the sword when you fight someone who's wearing armor. Because if you have a cutting sword and you try to hack at a metal plate on someone, it doesn't really do well. So you need to thrust. You need to thrust the gaps. So that means you need to hold the sword differently so that you can really get some good leverage in there. It also allows you to fight, wrestle, grapple, and the sword becomes very dynamic in all the moves that you can use. You have the pommel. It can be used as a weapon. You have the guard. It can be used as a weapon. You can hook the back of someone's leg with it. So when you're fighting in armor, a whole different set of rules come into play. All these different techniques that you can use allow this sword to go from something that you use to cut against the person to something that you can use to thrust and bludgeon and knock. And then you can get into the wrestling and the grappling. And one day we'll do a dagger video and we'll talk about how that is a good way to fight against someone in armor. Longsword itself, we know that 14th century is where we really get to see swords being gripped with two hands. We can have the épée bâtard, which is a big controversial thing. The bastard sword, we don't know exactly where it comes from. Is it a hand and a half sword? But some really big swords have been described that way. And that's subject for more research and another video, because I've tried doing research on it and you just get 5 or 6 different answers. But for most people, it is more of a hand and a half type sword. Of course, we move to the 16th century, longsword doesn't disappear. It's not as useful on the battlefield at that point, but we get a training sword. This one's from Dark Sword Armory. Really good steel. It's held up for almost 7 years now. It's a very good sword. And you'll notice it's different. It's got these extra little lugs, these little wings, these little points that stick out. That's called the shield, or shield, and that's extra hand protection. Because as we get into the 16th century, this becomes a fencing system for fun, for practice. It becomes a sport. So we have a lot of manuals that tell us about using this as a fighting weapon, armored and unarmored, and then we have a lot that tell us about fencing and having fun with this, and a lot of tricks and a lot of great things that you can do. Main traditions are German and Italian when we come to studying longsword, but you have some English sources as well. There are probably other traditions of longsword, we just don't have the manuals, so we can't really talk about them. But we know they're widely used in all cultures. Eventually, you'll end up with Zweihanders and Montantes and Spadonas, so really big swords for two hands. You don't use one-handed, but that's more of a 16th century invention, with a totally different reason. Those are not for fighting armor. Put that there so it doesn't fall, because if it falls, it'll hit the microphone. So when you use a longsword, we'll give you a few fighting basics here, because we have time in this video. A lot of it is cutting in about a 30-degree angle, and one thing that we haven't talked about is that when you attack someone, you have a strong and a weak, not the strong and the weak of the sword, but your attacks can be considered strong and weak. So if I'm right-handed, attacks delivered from my right side to my opponent's left side are strong attacks. Attacks from my left side to my opponent's right side are weak attacks. And of course, footwork is very important. I would always have to take a step. Well, not always, but it's good. All your momentum. Your sword starts the motion. You always have a little bit of motion in your sword as you go to attack. And then you follow up with your step, either what we would call stuttering or passing, depending on whether you're moving your front foot and then your back foot, or you're moving your back foot past your front foot. Again, we can do a whole video on just sword fight basics, which I hope to do in the next few weeks. But the sword like this gives you a lot of reach. A lot of power comes from this push and pull action. That is how you fight. You don't wind up, you just cut with the sword. It is still short enough that you can wear it at your waist. No, you do not wear it on your back. Back scabbards, a whole other video we can do. But short version is, you'd have to modify the scabbard in a way that dirt would get in and corrode your sword, so you should just wear it at the scabbard at your hip. It's also a lot easier, quicker to draw if the sword is in front of you. And one thing that we always like to say to our students is, you get under your sword, you get behind your sword. So if your sword is on your back, the sword is behind you. And as you're drawing it, it's not in front of you. So if you have it on your waist, your sword, you're behind it, you're under it, it's already in position. So we don't see artwork with people carrying swords on their backs. We don't have a lot that we can do. Yeah, you can carry the belt with the scabbard over a shoulder, but you'd slip it off your shoulder and draw the sword. You just don't draw the sword with the scabbard still on your back. At least not that I've ever seen. And a lot of videos will go, yeah, but there's a way you can do it. Just because it's a way that something could be done doesn't mean that it's practical to do, and if we don't see it in any historical context, then we can't say that it's a thing. Alright, but anyway, that's just a brief introduction to this really cool sword, the longsword. A sword made mainly for two hands. Remember, you can fight with cutting, you can fight with thrusting, you can do the Mordhau or Mordschlag, where you smash someone with the pommel, or the guard. It's pretty easy to defend against that when you know it, so if someone opens with that, it's usually a bad idea. Learning how to use a longsword, well, your basics can be covered in about 5 or 6 classes, but you really need a good 6 months before you start feeling comfortable with it. And like I said, I'm almost at 10 years since I started learning, and I'm still always going to learn something new here and there. There's always something new from a different manual that I can pick up. Always something. So that's what I do. I'll study it, read it, teach it, pass it along, and that's why I hope that you're enjoying all of the videos that I'm making, including this one, giving you just a brief overview to the longsword. And if you are enjoying, remember, like, subscribe, notification bell, tell your friends, and if you have a particular topic that you would like me to talk about, remember, Jaelien said, hey, can you talk about the longsword and half sorting? Well, I'll put that into my intro and we'll do another just half sorting video in the future. Well, there you go. So if you have a suggestion, you leave it in the comments, and I'd be happy to try and make a video just for you. So until next time, hope you're having a great day, staying safe, and keep on swinging.